Minister, the Disability Capacity Review was published in July of 2021 and its remit was to establish the level of additional funding that will be required to address unmet need and demographic change in disability services by 2032. So it found that additional funding of between 750 million and 1.3 billion would be required by 2032 to address those issues. Now, the Action Plan for Disability Services 2024 to 2026 was published in December of 2023 with proposals to start addressing the identifiable defects. So it incorporated proposed additional capacity to help bridge the gaps identified in the capacity review by 2026. And so among the things proposed in the plan were 600 new posts in Children's Disability Network teams, 900 new residential places, 500 people moved out of congregated settings, 260 people under 65 moved out of nursing homes, 800,000 additional personal assistance hours and 110,000 additional home support hours. Now, those are laudable proposals and very much needed to fill the gaps identified in the Disability Capacity Review. However, if we look at the recent budget announcement for disability services and the level of funding that was committed, I just don't seem to be able to square this circle. Now, Minister, you announced additional funding of 336 million in the recent budget for disability services. But once again, even DPROs and disability organisations have each year requested that this funding announcement be done in a much more transparent way. You did not set out that 290 million of this was for existing levels of service, while only a paltry 42 million is for the development of new measures and only an additional 4 million for capital projects. Now, the action plan proposed the delivery of an additional 600 new posts, approximately, for Children's Disability Network teams, on top of the already funded but unfilled posts. Now, the reality is, however, that regardless of how many posts are funded, that recruitment and retention within CDNTs is extremely difficult. And for the third year in a row now, the vacancy rate in CDNTs has risen from 524 vacancies in 2021 in the staff census to 707 in 2022 and 817 in the latest report, which was in 2023. And it's not down to funding. This is down to a lack of planning and consultation in advance of moving to the CDNT model, and that promised planning, policies and structures were not put in place. And this resulted in many experienced staff leaving disability services, which has resulted in a chaotic and challenging work environment for the remaining staff. Now, proper workforce planning should have been implemented well in advance of the introduction of the CDNTs. And in the aftermath of the messy implementation of CDNTs, this should have been a priority. And Sinn Féin have called for a workplace plan in 6 different motions in this government term. Now, this has had an absolutely devastating effect on children and families who are suffering because of the lack of support and services within the community. And one young lad, aged 16, his name is Kyle. And on the day that you announced your budget in 2024, Kyle was put into an induced coma at Beaumont following an incident in his family home where his parents, who provide full-time care, were forced to call Gardaí, who had to handcuff this 16-year-old non-verbal autistic boy into an ambulance so that he could receive treatment, having had one of his many recent violent outbursts in his home. Now, his parents, Linda and Robbie, both work, but their entire lives are centred around providing care to Kyle, and they have fought for support and services for Kyle for his entire life. He has significant high support needs. He's still in Beaumont Hospital under sedation. He was placed in an induced coma because of a state of distress and aggression which required sedation. His mum says that despite pleas from 2017, when Kyle's school hours were reduced and multiple requests for adequate support services, they've been left in crisis. And crucially, Kyle's rights have not been met. And his parents are at their wits' end. They cannot manage this situation anymore without the required supports. They cannot care for him, and they feel that he has been let down by his state. He has not been allowed to be the person he could have been because he did not get the support and early intervention that he required. And if that had happened, he could be at home with them, able to live a life. Now they have to seek a residential placement for him, which is going to be in Roscommon, miles away from his home in Dublin, where he has lived his whole life. Kyle is only one of many in this situation, and we will be facing many more if young children do not get the vital intervention that they need right now to help them to live at home with their families and to work and go to school and get education, early training, go on to work, denial of human rights. Thank you.
Minister, this is one of dozens of debates we've had on disabilities in this Dáil term, and indeed 5 separate motions have been brought forward by my party, Sinn Féin, on the issue of disabilities. And in relation to the government's record, this is a government that put in place a capacity review. It was a 10-year review which set out what was needed, how much money was needed to fund that review, what capacity was needed in terms of staff, in terms of resources for decongregation, for example, what supports were needed for children and for adults, and in all of the different areas to span disability services. The Disability Capacity Review has never been properly funded. We then had what's called an action plan for disability services, and we, of course, welcome when plans are put in place. But the problem is the plans are not delivered. And here we are again after a budget where a lot of disability organisations and people with disabilities themselves are telling us that not enough funding has been made available even to deliver on the plan the government has in place, which we know is inadequate in the first place. The most difficult meetings I have done as an Oireachtas member over the last long number of years since I've been in the Oireachtas, but also as a councillor, are meetings in relation to children with disabilities, and particularly now access to services. The Taoiseach made a point today when we were raising issues around assessment of need, that while they are important, what's more important is that children get access to services. I agree with that. We want children to get access to services, but we know that an assessment of need is important for a child as a gateway into some services, particularly in schools where there is a competition for scarce resources. But even if you go with the Taoiseach's logic, which I do, that we need to provide the services first and foremost to children, I talk to parents of children all of the time who have to battle with the state to get access to basic services for their child. So while they're waiting for an assessment of need, some children will get services, some children will not, and the word that's often used to me is patchy. That's the service their child gets. They might get some element of what they need, they may get all of it in very rare circumstances, and they may get none of it. And then they have to go private and pay out themselves as a family. And it's really traumatic for them when they're trying to get the access to the best services for their children. We have the same with adult disability services. I was dealing with one lady who has, it's her child, but the person is in his 40s. He's an adult, but she describes him as a child. He's living in Lismore in County Waterford. He accesses day services in Waterford City because there is no day services in Dungarvan. She has to drop him off at a drop-off point outside of Dungarvan, Kilmacthomas I think it is. She has to drive to Kilmacthomas every day, which is a long drive from Lismore, drop him off very early in the morning to get into the day services, and then he has to obviously get support in a bus and back again. She gets no support whatsoever. The first problem is the transport isn't there, she has to do the driving. The second problem is the day services don't exist in Dungarvan. And that's a problem not just for her, but for many children with profound disabilities in West Waterford. But that's the same right across the state. I dealt with another couple who I met a number of weeks ago. The couple are in their 80s. They have a child who they call again a child who is in his 50s with a severe intellectual disability. And they're worried about what will happen to him when they pass away. I mean, they're really worried about it because they had to fight tooth and nail to get whatever respite services, whatever services that their adult child has got right through his adult life and right through his childhood. Everything was a battle, that's what they were telling me. And they're really worried because of the lack of independent living opportunities which exist, and we need to do much more. So the reason why we have capacity reviews and the reason why we have so-called action plans is that, as I understand it, we look at what the identified need is, then we provide the resources, then we provide the services. But that's not people's lived reality or their experience. It certainly isn't the lived reality of the people with disabilities, and it isn't the lived reality of the parents either. It seems to be a constant battle. There are other issues in relation to payments with people with disabilities, empowering them to live independent lives, which is what we need to do. And in my view, and I've had several meetings with my party leader on this over the last number of weeks and with Deputy Tully, I want to see the next government and every political party really step up to the plate and deliver a manifesto and deliver election commitments that are real, that are deliverable, and will actually make a difference for people with disabilities, and once and for all put the rights of people with disabilities front and centre in relation to any programme for government.
Ministers, I just want to take you through the serious crisis in terms of services for children with disabilities in Donegal. I think you're fully aware of them. Over a year ago, Special Needs Parent Network Donegal represents over 900 parents of children with disabilities. And they published this survey about the real impact of the longest waiting list in the entire state for physiotherapists, occupational therapists, psychologists, speech and language therapists. None of this being provided, assessments not being done, serious crisis. A forum was established where the HSE would account to the parents' representatives and the public representatives in the county. It met once a month, then it was every 3 months, and now we've learned it's been stood down, without any consultation with the public representatives. And I think that's outrageous, that we were looking for accountability, looking for updates on recruitment. The parents told their stories. Indeed, they passed around photographs of their children just to get a human sense of who these children were and the impact on their lives. Stood down. Then you have organisations like iCare, Blue Stack Special Needs, who have been around now for over 20 years, one in the north of the county, one in the south of the county, providing services to huge numbers of children and their parents. Those organisations, until recent years, had to raise all the money themselves, huge fundraising efforts, ongoing to this day. And they'd asked for core funding, basic core funding. I think they have about €36,000 each. And they are going to fold unless they get appropriate funding. Now, Minister, this has been brought to your attention, but the HSE, working with you, have provided no solution. So I want to say, our disability services for children are in crisis across Donegal. We had a forum established to hold the HSE to account, to hold the government to account, and it's been stood down. Can you please ensure it's re-established as soon as possible, urgently? We get answers and we get solutions on respite care and on services for children with disabilities.
My colleague, Deputy Pauline Tully, for bringing this important motion to the House. And it's a real shame that she was compelled to do so. But this is what happens when you have a government who turns its face away from citizens who need support. At the outset, I want to acknowledge all of the workers, the Section 39 workers who gathered outside Mayo County Council yesterday. And one after the other, the Fianna Fáil and Fine Gael councillors stood up to say how absolutely disastrous it was in the way that Section 39 workers are being treated in relation to pay parity and the problems that that was causing in terms of service delivery in Mayo and recruitment and retention. And it is just absolutely, they were supported obviously by SIP2 and Forza. And Minister, I want to say to you, you have a responsibility to stop the forthcoming strike. These workers are being forced to go out on strike, and you need to sort it, because there will be people all over Mayo, vulnerable families, who will be left with no support while these workers are forced to go out on strike. It's absolutely incredulous that you have reneged on the promise that you have made to these workers. The government went to great lengths to produce the Disability Capacity Review, which since its publication in 2021 has gathered dust on the proverbial shelf. And of course the review told us what every one of us here know from our constituency work, that people with disabilities are being left behind, and that there's a huge level of unmet need by the government that the government won't address. In my own constituency in Mayo, I have seen the very real impact of this government's austerity towards people with disabilities. For example, the case of the 72-year-old lady from Mayo with spinal injury who has to go up to Clarenbridge in Galway to get respite, a distance of over 200 kilometres. I have case after case. What about Geraldine, the lone parent with 4 young girls? Her second eldest is 13 years old. Niamh has autism, epilepsy and type 1 diabetes. She requires 6 daily injections, all administered by her mother. Geraldine applied for respite services in February. She's still on the waiting list. She looked into private home care support, but was told there was no nurses available and was advised to place an ad on Midwest Radio to employ her own nurse. That's the help that these people are being given with people trying to look after people with disabilities. You should be ashamed. Absolutely ashamed of yourself.
In the past few months, I received a message that the Blakestown CDNT in Dublin 15 had informed the parent that the child had not received services for 72 months. I was so stunned at the date that I asked her, was it in writing, which she confirmed and dropped the letter up to me, and I know you have that letter. Minutes before the CDNT service, we used to have early intervention teams and school-age teams. But it seems that the change in name has done nothing to provide neither early intervention nor school supports for autistic children. In fact, it's gotten worse, and I think it's important to put names to this. And I have a letter here. I'm writing to you in regards to my son, Jaden. He's due to start primary school in September 25. He has epilepsy, autism and a feeding tube. His psychologist said he will need a cognitive assessment done before starting primary school. I sent off the assessment and needs form. I need this completed before I can enrol him in primary school to see what recommendations are given for him. I've heard nothing back, and the enrolment starts in most schools at the end of November. I'm getting very worried now that he won't be able to start school in time because this assessment hasn't been completed. Is there anything you can do, please? Another case, I finally received my son Luke's service statement for his assessment of needs, which is a 2-year battle. The report recommends that he requires supports including psychology, speech and language OT from his local CDNT in Blakestown. However, the waiting list is currently in excess of 72 months, 6 years. The letter states that this is a direct result of the recruitment and retention issues in Blakestown CDNT since the team was established. Luke will have completed primary school at the end of that stage, and it's far too late to receive anything in such like early intervention. As a trained neuropsych and developmental disability nurse myself, having worked for many years in the field in Australia, it is truly devastating that our young children are not given the support to enable them to progress and nurture their developmental needs. Having had the experience, I've been fortunate enough to have navigated the system thus far. There are many parents and families who are not so fortunate. Luke was diagnosed with the primary care team with ASD and discharged in the same meeting. A massive diagnosis, to be told, and no follow-up care. His next service or intervention is in 6 years. That is absolutely appalling.
Mágad a chairlach a airí tá sé iontach gohfuil se seo caras cór na Dáil ag mo chóglaí Pauline Tully a nacht agus ar nuí tá sé iontach gohfuil daoine an seo freisin atá an agóid tuairmí a rinslinn mar go bhfuil sé fíorthábhachtach go mbeadh tuairmí na daoine seo go gluisfear tuairmí na daoine seo. Tá san ón abhreiniú a rinú modula inúlach service go riine le mí chumas go bhfuil an túfas muoinú ag tastal an túfas inéisteacht ag tastal go dtí an bhliain 23 tá rá go dasaín idir 7.5 milliún agus 1.3 billiún ag tastal chun doling leis an méid atá GE i dtíobh service a gcóir daoine agus a gcuid teaghlaí. Agus is cuimhin am gina oltáchan dearnach go rá grúpi a bhín sig lé le daoine le mí chumas go nuir siad go soléir nar chóir díreach gomach sé seo pléite ag am an oltáchan ach go gafar go gatha an rialtas dul in leis le seo agus go gatha si dul in leis i meallach atá doíire. Agus airí tá súlam go se bhgéisteach mar chola seach an bio bín tiismóirí teachta seacha chuig mo FXa agus bín siad agrálam nachhfuil a gcuid páistí ná na servicí atá tasa weheb aáil marall go bhfuil siad ar listí fehebh atá wádróada agus níl siad ná na servicí atá díarthab aáil chomála sin tá san go fáibáil war an i Jeremy Fuisibh agus nachhfuil teaghlaí ag fáil an Fuisibh atá ag tasa weheb. Ar nuí ní amháin go gcuirn sin brú ar an teaghlach Current brew an páiste nu an duine fásta nu pe duine tá an Fuisibh sin ag tasa weheb a chomála sin go fátearmach níann se cílar bit mar nuí tá an go fátearmach go gcuirn se sin fiú tilebrú ar servicí agus marhealar sin cámuid dul in leis an fáib sin i Jeremy Fuisibh. Ní amháin sin gohfuil se sin Fuisibh gach coppla seachtain nu pe atá an ach cámuid breanú ar na servicí na omlána freisin tíbh mó gon Fuisibh sin an rud é beidir go gahamid breanú nu club ní tar éis scola. Onas go féidir le Charlie Lanach Darhub Beidir Gobergs mar sinje, Gollars na páistí eile Gollar Scol, agus go moch an cinál is tócha fís éagsúlan goghine agus go na Charlie seo, agus asúnam go nééis sibh le ar rún.
I would like to thank Pauline Tully for her Trojan work in advocating for better services and conditions for people with disabilities and for bringing the PMB to the Dáil. One of the mantras by members of the government was let's make the country a great place to do business in. However, on reflection, it is not a great place to be disabled in. A recent workforce found 817 staff vacancies currently exist across the Children's Disability Network teams. And here are some facts from my own constituency of County Wexford. New Ross Post allocated 11.05 to CDNTs. They currently have 6.95 vacant posts. Gorey allocated post 12.9. They currently have 6.8 vacant posts. Wexford allocated post 17.94. They currently have 6.8 vacant posts. In Escorty allocated post 20.3. They currently have 19.5 vacant posts. There are 12 CDNTs teams in CHO5, caring for approximately 7,000 children. Of these children, around 1,700 are waiting for an initial contact. The assessment of needs process is taking over 2 years. This is totally against the legal obligations of the state. Minister, the evidence is in plain view before your eyes. Surely you must see it's time to press the alarm button. To finish up, I would like to ask the Minister how many of the 68 deficits that were identified in the disability services have been addressed in the published action plan for 2024-2026. And I would like to welcome the ratification of the optional protocol of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. It's so important to people with disabilities. And finally, Section 39 workers must be given equal pay for their equal work. I would ask all deputies to support this important motion.
Thank you, Deputy Crowe.
There are over 4,000 children waiting on a Stage 1 assessment of need for services in the CHO7 area of Tala, West Wicklow and North Kildare alone. 4,000 children just waiting to be seen. That represents a 33% increase in the last 2 years in my area. The Taoiseach said today that tackling child disabilities is one of his priorities, but parents and their vulnerable children in my area have seen little outward evidence of his concern. Children are being left behind in dire need of disability support service at an early age. Supports like speech and language therapies that would give them the best chance of accessing education and leading the same lives as their peers are inadequate or not available. The pay and numbers policy is austerity by another name. Austerity in an era of 24 billion surplus. It's not only cruel, it's unbelievable and it's wrong. Hundreds of posts wiped out with a stroke of a pen when there's no excuse not to be doing all we can to fill these vitally needed posts. And that's only one aspect of the shambles that the government has made of the health service. I have long campaigned for the better treatment of Section 39 workers. The state was happy to outsource the vital work these workers do in our communities, but then completely abandoned their responsibilities to these organisations. Is there any wonder that disability support organisations cannot keep staff or provide services when they cannot keep staff on 2009 levels of funding? It's no longer sustainable for Section 39 providers to be expected to bail out the state for its inability to provide services when the government refuses to increase supports and funding despite their boasts of huge budget surpluses. A disability group, Walkinstown and Tala, has the ongoing difficulties in getting the state to release funds so they can maintain services and for the most vulnerable. They're far from isolated cases. The government like to talk up how well the economy is performing. But I ask for tonight, for who? Not the people who rely on disability services for some semblance of normality. Not the parents who have had to shell out private assessments and treatments because the community disability teams are chronically understaffed and need key personnel. So children with special needs shouldn't have to wait years to get an assessment and then wait years more to get support. But that's the reality facing many families in my constituency.
Deputy Quinlivan.
Essential that the opt-in protocol of the UNCRPD is ratified, as you have indicated in your response there, that the government agreed to accede this opt-in protocol on the 8th of October. Obviously, that's welcome, but you know, October is the dying days of the Dáil. Nobody believes it's going to last till after Christmas. I don't have to tell people here, those who live their lives with a disability need further support, and it is support that your government does not deliver. And we all deal with that. And every single day we get people into our constituency office. Minister, I've raised several times in this chamber the issue of Lakehala National School in Limerick City. That school has significant needs. It's a school catering for 186 children in an area the public deprivation index is described as extremely disadvantaged. A school where staff estimates that 72% of the children have an additional need, 72% of the children, with 38% of the children having more than one need. The fantastic staff have been pleading for over 2 years with government departments for additional resources to support these children, but at every turn the door has been closed. This is a school with significant disability and additional needs, but they cannot get the genuine supports they need. Minister, a response I got from yourself 2 weeks ago referred me back to the HSE. The school have written confirmation from the HSE that they will not fund any of these places or supports that they need. They've been put from one to the Department of Education, to the HSE, to yourselves. But the problem is these kids aren't getting the access and the services they need. So they're sitting there in a brand new school, a brand shiny new school delivered a number of years ago under the regeneration programme, but with no supports put in there for some of the most complex needs and some of the most complex things we'll see. And just in the very short time that's left to me, I just want to mention some of our fantastic disability service providers we have in Limerick, including Docus and Headway, who do incredible work already and do so on a shoestring. They shouldn't have to be constantly seeking support through fundraisers. They should be provided with adequate resources to do their important work.
Thank you. Deputy Martin.
Okay, look. I'd also like to commend Deputy Tully for bringing this motion to the House. Our delivering rights-based services and support for people has never been more pressing due to the government announcing 336 million in additional funding for disability services, while 290 million of that was for existing levels of service. This left just 46 million for new development measures and capital developments to be spread thinly across respite, day services, children's services, and of course the 11,000 children waiting for an assessment of need. This is despite the Disability Capacity Review indicating that a need for annual investments of 135 million over a decade. And that's why our budget would provide 147.6 million to meet requirements. Back home in my own county Tipperary, Cashel and Clonmel CDNTs have vacancy rates of 59% and 56% respectively, with therapy hours falling by 40% because staff haven't been hired. That's what funding excess levels of service gives you when your actions make experienced staff leave. And when Section 39 staff across the sector still don't enjoy pay parity with Section 38 and HSE staff, this must be addressed straight away. We would do it differently by funding targeted recruitment and retention measures for children's disability services, and a community care access fund to speed up access to mental health and disability diagnosis and interventions at 30 million for 2025. And that leads me to the need to ratify the optional protocol. The truth is that you've stalled on this to date because you cannot deliver for people with disabilities. That is why Josh in Clonmel can't get the school he deserves. And it's why another boy can't access the ASD primary placement in Carrick-on-Shore, and why schools are seeing funding and staffing delayed or denied. And I'll be writing to you, Minister, on all these issues. Now that you have indicated a change of heart on the optional protocol, it must be asked, how will you uphold those rights with such an insignificant approach to the real needs of people with disabilities? Budget 2025 has confirmed that, sadly, with your approach, nothing will change.
Deputy Andrews.
And I'd like to thank Deputy Tully for bringing forward this PMB. And if I could just say that Enable Ireland Sandymount School provides education for children with very complex needs. Many of the students are wheelchair bound and they need movement breaks, and they need those movement breaks in a specific class which is out of action because of a serious leak in the roof in over one of the rooms. And it's having a negative impact not only on their physical health but also on their education and their mental health. And the leak also means that the library cannot be used by anyone at all in the school. And the repair work needs to be urgently done. And as usual, children with disabilities are left at the back of the line. You know, we see the foam pouches and bike shelters being prioritised ahead of these children with priorities. It's very hard for you to go down and explain to the children. I'd be interested to see if you undertake to do that, to go down to the school in Sandymount and explain to them why the leak has been going on and has been putting out some of their classes for nearly 2 years. Explain to them why they can't have their classrooms, their stretch breaks, looking after their health. And, you know, I noticed the Minister, the Taoiseach today, he announced that there was funding, extra funding going to education and across different departments. Well, can you give a commitment to ensure that the Sandyman School will have the roof fixed as a matter of urgency and that the children will be able to get the breaks that they need desperately? And just give that commitment and tell them and show them that you actually care about children and people with autism.
Pat Buckley is sharing with Deputy Rory O'Murco and Deputy Pauline Tully.
2.5. Thank you, Ceann Corla. First of all, I just want to thank Deputy Pauline Tully for bringing this motion forward. I'm glad that the government are not opposing it. I've listened to the whole debate. And the first thing I suppose that comes to me is the workforce planning. And without any workforce planning, nothing happens. And even in our housing strategy, we had 10% of all social houses were actually going to be specifically designed for people with disabilities. So, I mean, it's about going forward and doing the right thing. You mentioned about Section 38s and Section 39s. There's a massive disparity there. I have my own daughter working on Section 39. No problem recruiting there. Section 38 is an absolute disaster. It's as simple as that. Something has to be dealt with that. We have 11 CDNT teams in the Cork-Kerry region, and they're struggling. I mean, the latest figures were just over 600 children waiting over 6 months still for an assessment. Going back to what you said about demographics and the demographic of change, I was very interested in that, Minister, because we all have the constituency dashboard, and I've spoke about that so many times inside here. The information is there from every census that's done. I can go into the smallest little village in my constituency in East Cork or the largest town, and it will tell you how many people have autism, how many people have disabilities, age cohort, how many. So the information is there, and we just can't seem to plan for this. The optional protocol, massive bugbear mine, has been in the previous government here at Cuivan O'Queel and battered that drum over and over and over again. I fear that it won't pass in the term of this Dáil from the rumours that are spinning around the place outside. But we'll keep fighting on this side of the House anyway, because it's on about a rights-based. And in my short little time left, what I'm really, really worried about here is the strain on the individuals, their mental health, the way they've been mistreated. Families are broken. And I can remember sitting and meeting many families a number of years ago, and it was so bad that they had cages, Alsatian cages inside in the kitchens. So when the son or daughter kicked off, they actually had to put them into the cage for their safety and for the child's safety. This is 2024. We should be never approaching that, right? And I just have to, because I've seen it and I've listened to families that have told me it. But the problem we have here at the moment with the assessment of needs, how bad the disability services, as you mentioned, respite services, we had a 22-bed respite service in Middleton. It's down to 6 beds now, so we're going backwards as well. So, look, I have a very, very short window of opportunity here. I welcome the fact that you're not opposing it, and thank you for that. Thank you, Chair.
Look, Minister, we really need to see that one-stop shop, and I suppose it needs to get beyond words. Like, we know the huge issues that there are if we're talking about either carers or we're talking about those with disabilities and the wider family. We need to make sure there's a proper framework around them. I'd like to welcome Alexandra Jezretska from All Abilities Action Alliance Louth, and I met herself, Emer McNally and Brian Crilly in the last while, and we obviously had an over and back in relation to the lack of school places, particularly in secondary school, for kids with autism. So look, a huge issue. Paul Callan from Louth Disability Cycling was actually down here earlier. I think Ian Rodairn had been giving him an award. Obviously, absolutely spectacular work that he's doing alongside Kevin O'Brien and others. Look, my colleagues have spoken about the fact that we need to see right on the disability capacity review, and I suppose the follow up on the action plan for disability. Look, if I'm talking specifically about autism, we've obviously seen the Autism Committee, the report, and obviously the recommendations. We know the issues in relation to respite. We've dealt with it before. I would actually follow up on what Pádraig McLaughlin had said. We had our own in Louth respite forum, which became a disability forum and has fallen by the wayside with the HSC. We really need to see it in place. But I can't not return to the issue I brought up at the Taoiseach, which is in relation to spaces for those with autism, and particularly in secondary school. The official numbers are you have 75 special classes in primary school, 23, and I'm not entirely sure that, you know, I would need detail in relation to some of these numbers. 23 in secondary school, but we're talking about, of the 18 secondary schools across County Louth, only 9 have actual special classes. But I've dealt with a number of the teachers, a number of the principals, that's across all, and their issue is in relation to they're dealing with the NCSE and they're dealing with the department and the building unit, and I think that's where this falls down. I've already mentioned the schools earlier and I've already run over my time, but I think we need to see real action across the board and the school inclusion model.
Thank you, Ken Corral. Can I welcome everybody in the gallery as well, all of the disability activists who have joined us here this evening for a 2-hour debate. And I want to also thank all the colleagues who spoke in favour of this motion tonight. I do feel a little bit insulted by Deputy Sean Sherlock's suggestion that some of my colleagues who were speaking for short speeches were only for social media. I would like him to know that every one of them would have liked to speak much longer on this issue if the time had been available. And when you have over 30 TDs in the party, you have to try and divide out your time. And it's an issue that's been raised in everybody's constituency. So every one of them could have been bringing up issues, and I just was disappointed in that. Look, I'm also conscious that there's many wide and varied disabilities. There's been quite a lot of focus here tonight on the CDNTs and on children's additional needs. But it's just to mention that we have blind people or people who are visually impaired. We have deaf people or people who are hard of hearing. We have people with physical disabilities, people who are wheelchair users, with intellectual disabilities, amputees, people who are autistic, people with mental health issues. So the need is very wide and it's varied. And in many cases, unfortunately, those needs are not being met. And I suppose the motion is comprehensive because it reflects what's in the disability capacity review. And it's reflective of the unmet need there, identified there, and addressed in the action plan, but unfortunately not funded sufficiently to address all of the actions in that action plan. I want to see that action plan actioned. I want to see those services and supports delivered for people, because disabled people have a right to live independently. They have a right to have the supports to live independently in this country. And there's been some reference to, residentials. And I mean, I know the action plan, did commit to 900 new residential places. It was committing to 500 people being moved out of congregated settings, to 260 of the under 65s out of nursing homes. But I mean, like if we look at the budget announcement, only 70 new residential places are being planned for the coming year. There's no specific figures, and many of those will be going to people that are currently in congregated settings or in nursing homes. And I'm also conscious that there's many, and there's been some reference made to it as well, of many disabled adults living with aged parents who are entitled to their home as well. And that's all around planning. And it's planning the accessible houses if it's a physical disability. It's planning to have the supports in place for the person if it's an intellectual disability. And I come across many people with intellectual disabilities in particular who are on the council housing list, and they're often the last to be housed. Because the supports are not being put in by the HSE. So the houses are there. They don't necessarily need any sort of accessible or adaptations made to the house, but they do need support to live independently, and that's not happening, or it's not happening fast enough, and it's not happening with the local authority. So that needs to be addressed. Also, for people to live independently, they need personal assistance hours, they need additional home support hours. Now, 800,000 additional personal assistance hours were committed to in the action plan, and 110,000 home support hours. But there's only 20,000 additional PA hours announced this year and 40,000 additional home support hours. So again, more is required to enable people to live independently. And I know it's not just about having the house and having the support to live in that house. You also have to have the transport, you have to have the access to education, the access to employment. It's an all-round package, and it needs to be addressed. Minister, I do welcome the announcement by the Government of the intention to ratify the UNCRPD optional protocol. I mean, I do feel that it should have been done already. I mean, it's something that the Disability Matters Committee has been calling for from we've been set up, and indeed every organisation has been calling for it as well. And I just feel there was nothing preventing its ratification, especially from the Assisted Decision-Making Capacity Amendment Act was passed in 2022. And I'm just concerned because we are hearing talk of a general election. So I don't know if the process has begun, does it continue, whether there's an election or not. I mean, I'd love to know exactly what the date is for the ratification of the optional protocol. And just finally, I suppose, to just mention the Indicon Cost of Disability report. I mean, it confirmed there's a significant additional cost of disability, and the extra cost is a key factor. It's perpetuating poverty among people with disabled people. And I just think, you know, that I know it's a social welfare payment that is being increased by €12. I think it needs to be increased by more than €12, but there also needs to be a cost of disability payment to address the large costs faced by disabled people due to the lack, in many cases, of the vital supports and services in the community. Thank you.